So yeah, tell me about Duke Nukem, the very first one.
The original Duke Nukem, yeah, that was the game that. Well, Todd had already done a couple of games for Apogee. I forget the first one. The second one was called Dark Aegis. And Dark Aegis was simply a sideways scrolling platformer where you played sort of like this medieval character in these dark times, and you could only go in one direction. So the goal was with his next game was to have a four-way scrolling game. So you could go both up and down, left and right. And so he was putting together this prototype, designing a new engine, and at the time he lived in California, and he would send me these builds on across the modem. I think we used X modem back in the day, or Z modem, and he would send me these builds every day, and I would give him feedback and stuff. And he finally got a little character in there, and it was running around, and it was kind of like this rock star heavy metal guy, and he wanted to call the game Heavy Metal. And I suggested to him, why don't we give the guy more of a comic? Why don't we follow the comic book model and give him like a comic book name? That way, like for instance we did with Commander Keen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of maybe that where that was born was let's name the game after the character. And so we were thinking, all right, we need to come up with a cool name for this character. And I remember coming up with the name Duke because I liked the way Duke was strong, and it was one syllable, and it was easy to pronounce, and just had impact. Duke. And then a couple of days later he came back with the last name Nukem, and as soon as he told me, I said, boom, we have a name. That's perfect. And so we designed the character, and sort of came up with the game world, sort of a little bit in the future that we could have little robot characters and so on. We basically started designing the game and everything, and near the end of the project, we still weren't happy with the way Duke looked. And so this is when I took the sprite characters for Duke, the sprite images, over to George Broussard's house, and George later became my partner in Apogee and 3D Realms. And he had pretty good art skills, and I said, George, take a look at this character here. Is there anything that you think we could do to make him look cooler?
Yeah.
And I remember just watching George spend like about 30 minutes, with these little pixel brush, painting tool, just kind of like giving Duke this really shiny, bright smile. George changed the hair color of Duke from white to yellow, which looked so much better in the game. Changed the skin color, did a few other little tweaks, and really that's kind of how the character came to its final look with the flap top hair and everything. So it's funny that the first two Duke Nukem games we didn't have the sunglasses, and that was more an issue of it's just very difficult to add those kind of details to
in small pixel art.
Right, and this is such a pixelized game to begin with, and you've only got 16 colors because it was an EGA, so there just wasn't a whole lot to work with, and those kind of details, like even giving him like a muscle shirt, was very hard to do. But that was basically how Duke was, how it was born. So what about you? When it comes to Duke, what's your first memory of Duke?
My first memory of Duke is it's probably Duke 3D. Like again, back then with all the shareware floppy disks, you wouldn't get every game, and I think the first time I saw this game, but I didn't know what the name was and so on, so it didn't really stick to me. But then probably one of the most impactful games of my youth was Duke Nukem 3D. And the first time I got Duke Nukem 3D was in this box collection called Duke Nukem 3D Kiloton Collection, where Duke Nukem 1 and 2 were parts of it. And this was still mid-90s, so these games were still pretty impressive to me. And I remember I played Duke 3D, that was quite fantastic. I played a ton around in the build editor, making my own little levels and mods for the game. But I thought the coolest extra was probably that you got to play the first two Duke Nukem games. So I actually never played the shareware of these. I played the actual full versions. I never knew that this was shareware. The first Duke Nukem game, I obviously back then I liked Duke Nukem 2 way more because I played both at the same time, and 2 was way more advanced game. The first one was way more simple, but I still remember the fact that I had no idea why it was called Duke Nukem instead of Duke Nukem, And in middle school, we were kind of arguing whether that was a spelling mistake or if it was just because of some other reason, like that was the first name and then he later changed the name. But most people thought it was a spelling mistake, and was like kind of like, didn't they even check the title of the game? Come on, you know, a bit like when Josh Broussard misspelled his own name in one of his games. But yeah, Duke Nukem 3D was definitely the defining game for me. That was fantastic, but it was so cool to see how the whole thing started and see what elements of the original game were transferred to, you know, the modern Duke Nukem games. Like, for instance, in here, what things in here, like, for instance, these crawly things in the walls, do you think those are on Duke 3D as well?
Yeah, not a lot was transferred, honestly.
Not even Dr. Proton.
No,
he was not the villain. He was the villain in the second one as well.
Right, and all these little Coke can collectibles and everything.
You could get the Coke cans though.
Yeah. You know, footballs, all these little collectible objects. You know, a lot of this stuff works well like in a 2D game, but doesn't work well in a 3D game. Now, what's funny is that these cameras, we totally brought those from the first game to the second game to the third game.
And the third game, yeah, that's a recurring thing, the cameras that follow you.
We put that in there so that you'd feel like, you know, you're always being watched.
Yeah.
You're not just alone in this environment. So that's one of our touches that we really liked. I actually designed all the levels in the first episode of Duke Nukem.
So this was a level designed by you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these levels were designed by me in the first episode.